Joy friends, and welcome to Once Upon a Storybook. My name is Cynthia with Cynthia's Joyful Creations, and today we are going to look at another angel story from the book In the Arms of Angels. These are true stories of heavenly guardians from the author Joan Wester Anderson. They heard the familiar great shivering of the air, as if wind had passed through 1,000 aspens, and the angels were there. Ethel Pokachaki from the Wind Harp and Other Angel Tales. It had been raining all day in Hugo, Oklahoma, and Christy Sellers really didn't care. 9 months pregnant with her first child, Christy was eager to give birth. She had planned nothing more strenuous than visiting her friend Amy in the next town for a few hours while their husbands Roger and Steve worked together on a truck. The guys pulled the truck inside the barn, Christy says. About a half-mile down the road, the barn was made of tin with, of all things, a telephone inside. The women stayed at home and played with Amy's 2-year-old and had made dinner for themselves and the men. By the time everyone had eaten, the rain was getting stronger, producing occasional hail and lightning. However, for Oklahomians, this was all fairly routine. None of us were afraid of storms because we live in the heart of Tornado Alley and we're used to wild weather. Many people have underground tornado shelters made of concrete in their backyards. People put chairs, maybe a bed, and some food and water inside. After dinner, the men returned to the barn and Amy began to fill the tub for her toddler's bath, while Christy lumbered to the couch and flopped down to watch television. The show was continually interrupted by bulletins announcing high winds. Suddenly the screen flashed red, spelling out, "Tornado Warning." The forecaster reported a tornado on the ground in Sofer heading directly toward Nelson. The woman froze. That was their area. "Take shelter! Take shelter!" the reporter shouted. Amy phoned the barn to warn the men, but there was no answer. She dialed again and the phone rang and rang. Where could their husbands go for shelter? The nearest storm cellar was past the house in the opposite direction. They'd either have to run home or lie in a ditch. Take shelter! Take shelter! She made another phone call, but there was no answer. Outside, the lightning looked like flashing strobes, and hail was pelting the ground. The women's eyes met. Where were the men? What if the tornado had already hit them, and they were hurt? Christy impulsively grabbed her jacket and keys to the only car available, her Toyota. "Amy, run! Take the baby to the storm cellar. I'm going to get the guys." "No, Christy!" Amy shouted. But Christy was already outside, wedging herself behind the steering wheel. She realized how dark the outdoors had become, and she started the engine and tried to stay on the gravel road leading to the barn. But it was flooded, making the car difficult to manage. The rain and hail pounded my car, and the cows had gotten out of the pasture and were blocking the way. She leaned on the horn, which startled the cows into moving, and kept going. At last she saw the barn, but the road leading up to it was rutted and winding. Could she navigate it? Shakily she urged the car forward. The noise was so loud that although my radio was turned all the way up, I could barely hear the announcer yelling to everyone to get out of their cars and find shelter. Tree branches rattled past her as she chugged and bounced down the path, clutching the steering wheel with shaking hands. All of a sudden, the car hit a deep rut, and Christy heard a shrill noise. The emergency brake went on, and so did all her engine lights. She knew that the engine was going to die. This had happened once before, and there were still several yards to go until she reached the barn. "I knew that I could not make it if I had to get out of my car," she said. "I couldn't run. I could barely walk at this point in my pregnancy." Gripping the wheel, she prayed aloud, "Lord, help me steer the car. You're in charge of the winds and the earth. Put your protection around me and my baby." The engine did not die after all. Instead, as Christy prayed, the car seemed to re-energize itself. It glided over the water-filled ruts, navigating the remaining curves with ease. I felt like I was hanging onto the steering wheel, not really driving. As she approached the open barn door, her headlights shone on a flatbed trailer, and the car very, very gently slid right into it and stopped. She had made it. Christy dragged herself out of her Toyota and staggered inside the barn. The men were astonished to see her. They had not heard the phone ringing because of the tremendous noise from the hail hitting the tin barn. "We've got to get you to a shelter," Roger yelled over the noise. They could use Steve's car. Carrying Christy, they ran to the car, started it up, skidded across the first curve, and landed in a ditch. No injuries, just another disabled vehicle. There was just one possibility left: a heavy work truck with a welder and other equipment on the back. Again, the men half-dragged Christy back down the path and into the truck. Would this nightmare ever end? How close was the tornado? The roads looked like rivers by then, and the wind was so strong that it rocked that heavy truck, she says. What were they driving into? Where were they? Suddenly the house loomed in front of them. Holding on to each other, they staggered inside. But this was not a good idea either, for the wind was horrendous. The house seemed to rock on its foundations. "We can get in a closet," Roger yelled over the noise. No way. "We've got to get to the shelter. It's safer," Steve roared back. Christy didn't think she could survive yet another trip, but she had to think of the baby. Somehow they staggered back to the truck. Miraculously, it started again, and they headed toward the shelter. But the tornado had apparently changed course. It was right alongside them. The ride was a nightmare, Christy recalls. Even with the wipers going full throttle, we could not see the rain. We could not see because the rain was coming sideways. There were baseball-sized hail and tree branches of all sizes flying past. Steve leaned over me to shield me in case hail broke the windshield. And there finally was the shelter. The men again helped Christy to the cellar door amid debris that was flying everywhere. The people below reached out to help her down the stairs as the door slammed safely behind them. She could hardly believe it. They were safe. The journey had seemed to take forever, but she soon realized that she had left the house on a heroic mission just a short time ago. She looked around. Her neighbors were already assembling blankets and towels for Christy to replace her soaked clothes. "What if she goes into labor?" Christy heard one whisper, and she saw the worried nods. All that running and worrying, but Christy didn't feel like she was in labor. In fact, aside from being tired, she felt amazingly healthy. And as she looked around, she realized something else. Everyone who had run to the shelter had been pounded by hail, she says. I could see the bruises on their shoulders, arms, backs, but it was dawning on me that I had not been hit once. I had been out in it longer than anyone, running across the fields, the driveways to my house, to the shelter, but I'd never been hit with hail, debris, or anything. It was as if an invisible shield was around me and the baby, a shield made of angels. The next day, when the men went to rescue Christy's car, they received another surprise. Christy's emergency brake was still stuck in the on position. The car should not have been able to move last night after the light went out. Christy remembered her prayer and the sudden smoothness of the ride. Had her engine even been running? She realized that she could not have heard it, but God and his angels did not need an engine to transport a vulnerable mother to safety. With God, all things are possible. As the community later learned, the tornado had been heading for their town, but had suddenly zigzagged in another direction, damaging only one roof. No one was hurt, and 2 weeks later, Christy increased the population by one, giving birth to a beautiful daughter nicknamed Stormy, who to this day loves going to church. Oh my gosh. Again, I have goosebumps. I hope you've enjoyed this angel story as much as I have, and I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to invite you into my home for this wonderful angel story. And I hope that you'll come back next week and have a little visit with me as we look at another story about angels. And until then, my friends, have a great week. Be joyful, and who knows, maybe your angel is talking to you or helping you through something. Take care, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye.